Welcome back, friends. Today's story is quiet, but it hits hard. A soldier comes home from the stars, but part of her is still out there. Stay with me till the end.
The greenhouse breathed at night the way nothing else did. That's what Mara Vance had decided. In her third week at the nursery, watching the polycarbonate panels fog and clear and fog again with the slow exhalation of 2,000 growing things. Think about that for a second. Plants breathe slower than people. Plants breathe slower than memory. She'd taken the night shift for that reason. And for other reasons she hadn't put into words even to herself. 3 years on, it still worked. Most nights. Most of the time. Like a key that's been filed down to fit a lock. It'll still turn, even after the lock's rusted. It was 3:40 in the morning. And raining. Portland rain, the soft kind. The kind that doesn't so much fall as accumulate. The polycarbonate roof carried the sound in a long, even hush. Like static turned down low. Like a breath held just under speech. Mara moved along the row of night-blooming jasmine with the watering wand, her thumb resting light on the trigger, and she let the water come out in the fine mist the jasmine light. The smell rose into the warm air. That particular green sweetness that doesn't belong to any other plant on Earth. She breathed it in and let it sit at the back of her throat. Her hands were dark to the wrist with peat. There was a smear of it on her temple where she'd pushed back her hair an hour ago and forgotten. The radio above the potting bench was playing something Portuguese, a woman singing slowly over a guitar. Mara didn't understand the words. She didn't need to. The voice was doing the work the words would have done. She watered the jasmine. She moved on to the tomato starts. The starts were 3 weeks old, pushing their first true leaves out above the cotyledons. That small, ordinary miracle she still stopped for, every time. She crouched and ran a finger along the edge of one leaf. It was the size of a baby's fingernail, and the exact green of a thing that had decided to live. And then, the bell at the loading door rang. She straightened. The wand hissed against her leg, and she shut it off, set it on the bench. The bell rang again, twice. The polite double tap of someone who knew the protocol. She wiped her hands on the canvas apron and went to the back. Past the row of orchids in their bark. Past the misting bench. She rolled the loading door up by hand because the motor had been broken since November and nobody had fixed it. The driver was young. 23, maybe 24. Navy windbreaker with the supplier's logo on the chest, clipboard tucked under his arm. He grinned at her. Friendly. That easy, unburdened grin of someone whose body had never been told a secret it couldn't unhear. Morning. You the manager? No, Mara said. I'm the only one here. Manager's in at 6. Cool, cool. I just need a signature. You can sign, right? You work here. I work here. He stepped aside and gestured at the pallet on the lift gate behind him. It was wrapped in clear plastic and banded with 2 stripes of bright tape. The tape was orange. Mara looked at the tape. And here's where it shifts. It was the wrong orange. The precisely wrong orange. You're going to want to hear this part. It was the orange of the warning strips at the seam of every interior airlock in the agricultural dome on Kepler-186f. The shade some committee on Earth had picked 12 years before she was born because it was the color the human eye picked up fastest in low light. And she'd stared at 4 meters of that orange for 9 seconds. At the end of a corridor where the lights were failing in a pattern of 3 on 3 off. Where someone was breathing too fast next to her. Where the radio inside her helmet was saying something she couldn't now remember. Where the dome's cooling system was clicking against itself in a way that meant the seals were going. The driver was talking. The driver had been talking. From a place down near Salinas. They do the heritage stuff. The heirloom varieties you guys carry there. Yes, Mara said. The driver held out the clipboard. She took it. Her hand was steady. Her hand was always steady. She signed her name in the small box at the bottom of the manifest, careful upright handwriting, the letters coming out the same as they always did. Even. Unhurried. She handed the clipboard back. He took it, and he glanced at her forearm. The sleeve of her thermal had ridden up when she signed. He could see the tattoo on the inside of her wrist, the small black numeral 14 with a single dot beneath it. And his face did the things civilian faces do when they notice. Oh, he said. Hey, were you in? I was in. My uncle was Navy, he said. Surface, though not, not out. He gestured vaguely upward with the clipboard. Thanks for your service. Sure, Mara said. He grinned again. Same unburdened grin. He wheeled the pallet jack down off the gate and into the bay, asked her where she wanted it. She pointed. He set it down where she pointed. He said, "Have a good one." And she said, "You too." He climbed back into the cab. The truck pulled out of the lot with its reverse beeper chirping into the rain. And Mara stood in the open loading bay with her hands at her sides. And she looked at the orange tape on the pallet for 30 seconds. Without moving. Yeah, 30 seconds. Then she walked back to the potting bench. She picked up the wand. She turned it on. She watered the rest of the tomato starts. Every row. In the slow, even pattern she'd developed for them. Her hands were doing what they were supposed to do. The Portuguese song ended, and another one started. This one a woman with a lower voice. Mara watered the basil and the lemon balm and the small flat of marigolds someone had ordered for a wedding. She didn't look at the loading bay again. At 4:15, she went into the break room and made herself a cup of tea. She held the cup in both hands for a long time before she drank any of it. And here's the thing. She counted the exits from the break room. There were 2. She'd counted them on her first day. She'd counted them every day since. She didn't remember when she'd started doing this. And she didn't particularly want to. At 6, the manager came in. Soft-spoken woman who'd owned the nursery for 19 years. Morning. Morning. Anything I should know about? Selena's pallet came in early. It's in the back. Oh, good. That was the handover. Mara got her coat. She walked home. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time she came out onto Hawthorne. The streetlights were still on. The sidewalks were wet and shining and empty. She walked past the closed coffee shop, the closed bookstore, the laundromat that's never closed. She crossed at the light, even though there was no traffic. She turned onto her own street and went up the alley behind the bakery to the side door that led to the apartment above. The bakery was already open. It's always already open. Mr. Tran was in the back with the ovens, and the smell of baking bread came up the stairs with her, yeast and butter and the particular sweetness of pâté being warmed. On the 3rd step from the top, she stopped. The way she always did. She let the smell sit on her for a moment. Because the smell belonged to this life, not the other one. And she'd learned to take such things when they were given. In the apartment, the cat was waiting in the middle of the kitchen floor. Hollis. Opinionated gray tabby of indeterminate age. She hadn't intended to keep him. He'd appeared in the alley 2 winters ago. Half-starved. Missing a piece of one ear. She'd fed him once because she had a can of tuna. Then she'd fed him twice. Then she'd brought him inside on a night when it dropped to 20 degrees. And the question of whether she was keeping him had simply, at some point, stopped being a question. He sat down now and looked at her. His tail went once, twice, against the linoleum. "I know," she said. She fed him. Made another cup of tea she didn't drink. Stood at the kitchen window and watched the alley fill slowly with gray light. There was a Vietnamese newspaper on the windowsill that Mr. Tran had given her months ago, in case she ever wanted to learn. She hadn't learned. He hadn't taken it back. The paper was curling at the edges. She didn't think about the orange tape. She didn't think about the corridor. She didn't think about the radio in her helmet or what the radio had been saying or anything at all. She drank half the tea, brushed her teeth, undressed, got into bed in the gray daylight. Hollis came up after a minute and settled in the bend behind her knees. She lay there with her eyes open and looked at the line of light under the bedroom door. The line she had to leave there. For inches of hallway light. Always. She watched that line until her eyes shut.
She sleeps with the light on. There is a reason. We will learn it soon.
And here's the part nobody knew. She hadn't told anyone about Devi. Hadn't told anyone in 3 years. The line of light held steady. The rain came back lightly against the window. Hollis began, slowly, to purr. She slept. Okay. 3 days later. A Wednesday that had been gray all day and was now gray and dark. Mara walked the 11 blocks up to the bar on Mississippi Avenue. Hands in her coat pockets. Shoulders pulled in against a wind that had started carrying the first real cold of the year. The bar was called The Anchor and had nothing to do with the Navy. Yeah, really. It was named for the owner's dog, who died in 2019, and whose photograph hung above the till in a small frame with a black ribbon around the corner. 8 stools. 3 tables. A pool table in the back with a rip in the felt mended with green tape. Mara had been coming here once a month for 2 years and 4 months. She didn't drink much anymore. She came anyway. Because Carlos came. Carlos Reyes was already on his stool when she walked in. He lifted 2 fingers off the bar in greeting without turning his head. She took the stool next to him. The bartender, Jean, tall woman, hadn't asked either of them a single personal question in 2 years and 4 months. Brought Mara a club soda with lime without being asked. Brought Carlos another of whatever he was drinking. Went away. How was the week? Carlos said. The week was the week. Yours. Mia's recital is Saturday. What's she playing? Something French. I can't pronounce it. She's been practicing it at 6 in the morning because that's apparently when serious musicians practice, according to her. Anita is going to lose her mind. How is Anita? Anita's good. Anita says hi. Hi back. They drank. The bar was about a third full. Somebody was playing pool in the back, and the click of the balls and the low conversation of the two men at the table came forward in pieces. Above the bar, the television was muted on a basketball game. Mara watched the players run up and down the floor in their bright uniforms without quite registering the score. Blazers are losing, Carlos said. Blazers are always losing. Blazers are a state of mind. Mara almost smiled. Carlos drank his beer. Now Carlos. 41. Small, dense man with very steady hands. Face that had been kind before the 14th and was still kind, but in a more careful way now. He'd been their medic. The best medic Mara had ever known. And what that had meant in the corridor, she didn't let herself think about it. Not here. Not in this bar. Not on a Wednesday, with the pool balls clicking and the basketball game running silently overhead. And then it happened. The woman at the next stool overleaned in. She was in her 50s. Soft blue cardigan. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Glass of white wine in front of her. She'd been there when Mara came in. She'd been listening. Not unkindly. The way people in bars listen. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I saw your tattoos. Carlos's shoulders did a small, precise thing that Mara felt rather than saw. He turned, slowly, with the polite face on. And the polite face, listen, that was a thing he'd built over 3 years. Board by board. The way a man builds a shed in his backyard on weekends. Ma'am, Carlos said. I just wanted to say thank you. For your service. Both of you. My nephew's thinking about enlisting. He's 18. He wants to go out. He says he wants to do something that matters. That's a big choice for him, Carlos said. It is. It is. Nobody talks about it, you know? About what it's like. He asks me, and I don't know what to tell him. I don't want to scare him, but I don't want to. I just want to understand. What was it like? Out there. Carlos took a sip of his beer. Set it down. Nodded slowly, like he was considering the question with great seriousness. And then he said, in the warm, easy voice of a man who'd said this exact thing 14 times in 2 years, it's hard to put into words, ma'am. Every deployment is different. Every person comes back with their own picture of it. The best thing your nephew can do is talk to a recruiter, talk to a counselor, take his time. There's no right answer. But you were both out there. Was it the Kepler thing? Was it that one? My God, that one was. I remember when that was on the news, my husband and I just. It was a long time ago, Carlos said gently. Of course. I'm so sorry, I shouldn't. I just want to understand. I know, Carlos said. I know you do. It's all right. She talked for another minute and a half. Carlos managed her, nodded at the right moments, made the small encouraging sounds at the right moments, offered her absolutely nothing. And he did it so smoothly, she didn't even realize she'd been offered nothing. She finished her wine, got up, put on her coat, patted Carlos on the shoulder, told them both again to take care of themselves, went out into the night. The door clicked shut behind her. Carlos exhaled through his nose. That's 3 this month. You're getting faster. I'm thinking of getting business cards printed, Carlos said. He didn't smile. His voice was perfectly flat. No, I will not tell you about the screaming. Please enjoy your evening. Mara laughed. It came out of her in one short, hard sound, like a cough. She put her hand over her mouth and shook her head. Carlos let himself smile. A small private smile. They sat for a while not saying anything. The ice in Mara's club soda had melted to slivers. She picked up the glass and tilted it. The slivers shifted, and the sound they made against each other was a small high clicking. And just like that, for 2 seconds she was in a room with a low ceiling and the cooling system was failing in exactly that register, and Yusuf was saying something about coffee and she set the glass down. You good? Carlos said. He didn't look at her. I'm good. You sure? I'm sure. A man at the pool table laughed, sharp, the way men laugh when they're about to lose money. And Mara felt the hair on her forearms go up in a slow line. She pressed her thumb against the wet ring under her glass. She breathed out. Tell me about Mia's recital. Carlos told her about Mia's recital. He told her at length. He told her about the dress and the sheet music and the teacher and the small recital hall in Beaverton where the parents would sit in folding chairs. Mara listened, and at some point in the telling, she came back into the bar. The whole way back, like coming up into a body after a long underwater dive. She drank her club soda. She watched the Blazers lose. Outside, the wind had picked up. A man in a doorway across the street was smoking. The smoke came across the street to them in a thin, acrid drift through the open door when someone came in. And the smell was the smell of a flamer crew having gone through an irrigation room. That specific chemical sweetness of accelerant and burned organic matter. Mara closed her eyes for 1 second and opened them again. I smelled it too, Carlos said. Without looking. Yeah. Yusuf used to say. That coffee was a war crime. Yeah. They were quiet. I miss him, Carlos said. Me too. Halloran called me last month. How is he? He's in Tucson. He's selling boats. He sounded like Halloran. That's something. That's something. He asked about you. What did you tell him? I told him you were okay. Good. You okay, Mara? I'm okay, Carlos. They drank. They watched the game. Now listen to what they didn't talk about. They didn't talk about Bex. They didn't talk about Devi. They didn't say the word Kepler. They didn't say the word dome. They didn't say the word corridor. They hadn't said any of those words in this bar in 2 years and 4 months. And the not saying was a structure they'd built together.
They both went through it, but they never say the words. Not once.
Without ever drawing up a plan. The structure held. The way a shed in a backyard built one weekend at a time will hold. At 10 of 11, Carlos finished his beer and put a 20 under the empty glass. Same time next month. Same time. Mara. Yeah. You got my number. I got your number. Use it. I will. He squeezed her shoulder once, lightly, and went out. Mara sat for another 20 minutes. Finished her soda. Jean came over and asked if she wanted another. She said no, thank you. She paid. She got up. She put on her coat. She walked home along the bridge over the river. She stopped on the bridge. Halfway across. Put her hands on the railing and looked down at the water. The water was very black. The lights of the city were broken on it in long, uneven lines. She stood there and looked for a long time. And the river didn't ask her anything at all. She kept walking. She went home. The line of light was under the bedroom door. Hollis was on the bed. She slept 4 hours and dreamed the dream she always dreamed, and woke at 6, and made coffee, and stood at the window, and watched the alley fill with light. The number was in her phone. She didn't call it. She washed her cup. Went to bed at noon. Got up again at 8 that night. Went to work. Watered the jasmine and the tomatoes and the marigolds. Didn't look at the loading door. The night passed. And the next night. And the next. Okay, here's where it gets heavy. The anniversary fell on a Saturday. Mara had taken Saturdays off for 3 years. She'd taken this particular Saturday off for 3 years. She'd regretted it for 3 years. And she did it again anyway. Because not doing it would have been a different kind of admission. And she wasn't yet ready for that admission. So she got up at 8. Made coffee she didn't drink. Stood at the window for a while. Put on her coat. And went out into a day so bright and cold and perfectly clear that it felt like a personal insult. The light came in low across the rooftops. The puddles in the alley had ice at the edges. Her breath made a small cloud when she exhaled. She watched it dissipate. Made another one. And she walked. She went to the farmer's market under the bridge. Bought a loaf of dark rye from the bakery stand. A wedge of cheese from the cheese stand. A small bunch of late chrysanthemums from a woman with a wool hat pulled low over her ears. She didn't buy anything red. She carried the paper bag of bread and cheese and the loose stems of flowers, and she walked along the river path with the cold air burning the inside of her nose. She passed a man with a dog. She passed 2 women on a bench with paper cups of coffee. She passed a boy on a bicycle. The bicycle had a bell, and the boy rang it as he passed her and grinned over his shoulder, and she nodded, gravely, the way you nod at a small king, and he laughed and rang the bell again as he went, and the laugh carried back along the path for 10 seconds and then was gone. She didn't decide to go to the wall. She just went. Now the wall. The Civilian Memorial in Waterfront Park wasn't a federal monument. The government didn't build it. It was a low curving wall of basalt that the people of the city had paid for. with the names of the Portland area dead from off-world service cut into the stone in 3 columns. There were 81 names. There would always be more names. Devi's name wasn't on it, because Devi was from Lagos. Mara came here every year on this day anyway, and stood in front of the wall, and read the names she did know and the names she didn't, and tried not to do whatever it was she was trying not to do. There was a child at the wall. The child was maybe 7. Red coat that was a size too big. Hair in 2 careful braids that were starting to come apart. She was standing in front of the 2nd column with her bare hand pressed flat against the stone. Her father was crouched next to her, in a long olive jacket, with his arm loosely around her waist. The child was asking him something. He was answering her quietly. Mara stopped at a polite distance and waited. The child said, "But all of them?" "All of them, sweetheart." "All at once?" "No, not all at once. Different times. Different places." "Why are they all together then?" "Because the people who loved them wanted them to be together. So we could come and say hi." "Hi," the child said, to the wall, experimentally. Then she said, "Hi." Again, more confidently. Then she said, "Daddy, what does off-world mean?" "It means very far away. Farther than the moon." "Were they astronauts?" "Some of them. Some of them were soldiers. Some of them were doctors. Some of them were farmers." "Why did the farmers die?" The father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sometimes people go very far away to do something good, and something bad happens to them. And we remember them because what they were trying to do mattered." The child considered this, and Mara stood very still on the path. The cold light came in across the grass, and the river was bright and slow behind her. And she could feel it, without words yet, the thing beginning to come up, the long inevitable rise of it. And she let it come, because she hadn't let it come for 3 years. And she didn't have any more not letting in her. The drop bay had smelled like vomit and oil. That was what she remembered first. They'd been strapped in for 9 minutes before the doors opened. Bex had thrown up at the 4-minute mark, and the smell of it had mixed with the smell of the burn jets warming up, that particular oil they used in the atmospheric engines. The combination had been very specific. She hadn't smelled anything like it before or since. The child said, "Daddy, is the lady okay?" And that's when Mara realized she was crying. It wasn't a thing she was doing on purpose. It was a thing that was simply happening. The way rain happens. Her face was wet. Her hands in her pockets were perfectly still. The father looked up. He had a kind, tired face and dark eyes. And he saw her. And Mara saw him decide, in 1 second, not to make a thing of it. He said, quietly, to the child, "I don't know, sweetheart." Maybe she knew somebody. The child looked at Mara. The child had brown eyes the color of wet bark. And she looked at Mara for a long, unembarrassed moment, the way only very small children can look at a stranger. Then she nodded, gravely, like this was a reasonable thing to know. And she turned back to the wall. Halloran had been the one who gave the order. He'd gone last in the drop sequence because that was where the sergeants went. And Mara had been the one before him. And they'd gripped each other's gauntlets for 1 second at the door before he went. His face inside the visor had been very calm. The calm Halloran always got in the last second before something terrible. "You ready, Vance?" he'd said over the squad channel. "Yes, Sergeant." "Good girl." The way her father had said good girl when she was 6 and stood up on her bicycle for the first time. And then they'd gone. The dome had been white and curving and wrong. The wrong had been in the air pressure. The wrong had been in the smell that came up through the joints of the helmet seal, a smell like wet hay and copper and something else. Something for which she didn't have a word, and didn't want one. The wrong had been in the way the floor of the dome had felt slightly soft under their boots, in places where the collective had grown up through the substrate from below, and the way it had taken her 3 minutes to understand that what she was walking on was alive. "Look, Daddy," the child said. She'd moved down the wall to the 3rd column, and she was pointing at a name. "This one is a girl's name. Esperanza. That's a beautiful name." "What did she do?" "I don't know, sweetheart." "Can we find out?" Maybe we can find out." There had been 407 civilians in the dome. 407. Keep that number in your head.
417 people. Hold that number. It matters.
71 in the first wave, the medical and the elderly. The 14th had gotten them out in the first 11 minutes. 140 in the second wave, the families with small children. And Yusuf had been the one who organized them in the staging room with the gentleness he used on absolutely everyone. Mara had watched him crouch down to talk to a 4-year-old who wouldn't let go of his mother's leg. And she'd heard Yusuf say, in Arabic, something low and sing-song. And the 4-year-old had laughed. In the staging room. In that place. On that day, the 4-year-old had laughed. And Mara hadn't known until that moment that Yusuf spoke Arabic. And there were now 1,000 things she'd never know about Yusuf. Because she hadn't asked when she could have asked. The third wave had been the hardest. The third wave had been the holdouts. The ones at the back of the dome. The ones who had barricaded themselves in the residential modules when the collective had first come up through the irrigation lines 6 days before. They'd been thin and bad-smelling and very quiet. And one of them had been a woman in her last month of pregnancy. And one of them had been an old man with a cat in a pillowcase. A cat. In a pillowcase. And Mara had thought, looking at it, this is what we're doing here. This is what's happening. A man has put his cat in a pillowcase, and we've come to bring him home. The third wave had been moving out through the long corridor between the residential section and the staging dome when the collective had come up through the showers. Daddy. Yeah. I'm cold. Okay. Let's get you a hot chocolate. Say goodbye to the people. Goodbye, people. Wave. The child waved. The child waved at the wall. Mara watched the child wave. The father straightened. And he caught Mara's eye for one more second and gave her one small private nod. The nod of a man who decided to leave another adult her dignity. Then he took his daughter's hand, and they walked away across the grass. The red coat very bright in the cold light. The braids coming further apart. The child still waving over her shoulder. Halloran had given the order to hold the corridor. He'd given it on the squad channel and in his ordinary voice. 14. On me. We hold this line. Civvies are still moving. Hold until they're clear. Copy. And 8 voices had said copy, including hers. And they'd set up at the bend in the corridor with the irrigation room at their back and the staging dome at the far end. And they had held. They held for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. 8 people. Yusuf had gone down first. He'd been on the left flank, and the thing had come up the wall behind him in a way that nothing was supposed to be able to come up a wall. And he'd said, on the squad channel, with great calm, oh. And then he'd said, also with great calm, get back. And then he hadn't said anything else. Mara didn't remember the sound. People said later that there had been a sound. She didn't remember it. She remembered the silence after. And Halloran on the channel saying Yusuf, Yusuf respond. And the silence. And Halloran saying, after the third try, in a voice that was still ordinary, copy that, hold the line. Bex had been on Mara's right. Bex had been 19. Bex had been crying for about 6 minutes by then. Not loud, just steady. The way a child cries when it's been crying for a long time and is no longer thinking about it. Bex had been shooting, too. And shooting well. With the long, careful trigger discipline she'd been taught at Pendleton. But she'd been crying while she did it. Mara had reached over with her free hand and put it on the back of Bex's neck, between the helmet and the collar, where there was a half-inch of bare skin. And she'd held it there for 10 seconds. And Bex had gone quiet. And Bex had kept shooting. And that was the last time Mara touched Bex while Bex was alive. The civilians had moved past them. In a long line. Single file. The way they'd been told. The pregnant woman had walked. The old man with the cat had walked. A teenage boy had walked with his arm around a smaller boy who might have been his brother. A woman who couldn't have been older than 25 had been carrying a toddler against her shoulder. And the toddler had been asleep. Asleep. In the middle of all that. And Mara had thought, in the middle of everything, that toddler is going to wake up someday and not remember this. And that toddler is going to be fine. And that toddler is going to grow up. Debbie had been the third to last on the line. The last 2 had been Halloran and Mara. That was the order Halloran had given. Squad out. Sergeant last, but 1. Corporal last. And the last, but 1, and the last would close the door. Debbie had been moving back along the corridor toward them. Walking backward. Covering the rear with her rifle up the way she'd been trained. When the thing had come out of the vent above her. Hang on. It had come down on her shoulders. It hadn't killed her. It didn't kill quickly. It had wrapped around her shoulders and her neck and the back of her helmet. And Debbie had gone down to one knee. And Debbie had said, on the squad channel, in a voice that was almost annoyed, oh, come on. And Mara had been 6 meters away. 6 meters. She'd crossed 3 of them. Halloran had grabbed her arm and stopped her. Halloran's hand on her arm. The weight of Halloran's hand. Halloran saying, on the private channel, the one for sergeants, the one Mara had access to because she was Lance, the one nobody else could hear, Vance. Vance, look at me. You can't. You can't, you understand. You go to her, and we lose the door. You hear me? We lose the door. Vance. Debbie had been on the corridor floor. Debbie had been looking at her. Debbie's visor had been clear. Debbie's eyes had been clear. Debbie had been 22 years old. From Lagos. Had a younger sister named Adiz. Had wanted to be a veterinarian before she'd enlisted. Had hated the smell of synthetic eggs. Had laughed harder at Yusuf's jokes than anyone else in the squad. And Debbie had said, on the squad channel, so everyone could hear, Mara. Mara had said yes. Debbie had said, do it. Mara had said no.
Oh no, I can feel what is coming. I do not want to hear it.
Debbie had said, do it, please, do it, Mara, please. The collective had been working its way down Debbie's neck. The collective had been slow. The collective was always slow. The collective had been moving inside the seal of Debbie's suit. And Debbie's face inside the visor had begun to change. Very slightly. And Debbie had said, fast, fast, before, please. And then Debbie had said, evenly, with great care, with her veterinarian's voice, the one she would have used on a frightened animal. Tell my mom I wasn't scared. Mara had raised her rifle. The shot had been clean. The collective had recoiled from the body for about 3 seconds, the way it did. And in those 3 seconds Halloran had let go of Mara's arm. And Halloran had said on the open channel, very calmly, fall back, close the door. And they'd fallen back. And they'd closed the door. And the civilians had lifted off the pad at the staging dome 11 minutes later. All 407 of them. Minus the dead. Minus Devi. Minus Yusuf. Minus Bex, who'd been hit in the last 6 minutes by something Mara hadn't seen and hadn't been able to look at afterward. And the transports had cleared atmosphere. And the orbital had gone weapons hot. And Kepler-186f had been quarantined 18 hours later. And the 18 days had ended. And 3 of Mara's squad had come back. 3 out of 8. One of them had been Mara. One of them had been Carlos. One of them had been Halloran, who was now in Tucson, selling boats. The wall was in front of her. The wall had been in front of her the whole time. The names were in 3 columns. The light was cold and very bright. Her hands in her pockets were still, and she was still crying, and she hadn't made a sound. And there was nobody at the wall now but her. She said, out loud, very quietly, to no one, to the wall, to the cold air, to herself, to Devi, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took me this long. The river kept moving behind her. A gull went over. Somewhere across the grass a dog barked once and was quiet. Mara stood in front of the wall for another 4 minutes. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand. Once. Briskly. The way she would have wiped soil off. And she turned. And she walked. Okay. Stay with me. She walked all the way home. It took her an hour and 10 minutes. She didn't stop. She didn't buy anything else. She didn't look at her phone. When she came up the alley behind the bakery, the smell of bread was coming up the stairs. Mr. Tran was in the back with the ovens. He saw her come past the door and lifted one flowery hand in greeting. She lifted hers back. She went up the stairs to the apartment. She sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours without taking off her coat. Hollis came and sat in her lap. She put one hand on his back. He purred. The light moved across the kitchen wall and turned gold and then began to thin. She watched the light go. She'd told no one. She'd told no one in 3 years. And she'd just stood in front of a wall in a park and told everyone. And no one had heard her. And a child in a red coat had waved at the dead. And a man with a kind, tired face had decided to leave her dignity. And somehow, that had almost been enough. At 7 she got up and put the kettle on. Took off her coat. Made tea. Fed Hollis. She opened the tablet on the kitchen counter. And she pulled up the contact the family liaison officer had given her 3 years ago. The contact she'd carried unopened. The way a person carries a folded letter in a coat pocket through a long winter. She looked at it for an hour. Mrs. Adiz Okonkwo, mother of Lance Corporal Adiz Devi Okonkwo, deceased. 14th ODI. Kepler-186f Containment Action. An address in Suralere, Lagos. A phone number. An email. She didn't call. Not yet. She wasn't going to call. Whatever was going to happen, it wasn't going to happen on a screen. She closed the tablet. She picked up her phone. She called Carlos. He picked up on the second ring. He didn't say hello. He said, "You okay?" "No." A pause. Then, "You want me to come over?" "No. I just, I just needed someone to pick up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's late. You've got Mia's thing tomorrow. I shouldn't. Mara. Yeah. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Take as long as you need. She started to cry again. She hadn't known she had any crying left. Carlos. Yeah. I went to the wall today. I know. I figured. I almost called you. I didn't because I didn't want to. I don't know. It was okay. There was a kid there. A kid. In a red coat. With braids. Asking her dad about the names. She asked her dad why I was crying. What did he say? He said maybe she knew somebody. Carlos was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's a good dad." Yeah. Mara. Yeah. What do you need? I don't know. I don't know. Okay. That's okay. You don't have to know. Tell me about your week. Carlos, Tell me about your week, Vance. And she did. She told him about the orange tape on the pallet. She told him about Mr. Tran and the extra banh mi he sometimes put in the bag without saying anything. She told him about the cat doing a thing the cat did, where he sat on the edge of the bathtub when she showered and put one paw on the wet tile and then took it off and stared at it like he'd been personally betrayed. Carlos laughed. Carlos told her about Mia's recital outfit, which Anita had finally vetoed at the last minute in favor of a different dress, which had caused a tactical situation in the kitchen. Carlos told her about a form he'd filled out the previous week from the VA, a form which had asked him if he had any ongoing service-related concerns. And he'd checked yes, and they'd sent him a pamphlet. A pamphlet. A pamphlet, Mara. For Kepler. For Kepler. I framed it. Anita put it in the downstairs bathroom. Mara laughed. She laughed for a long time. And she was also crying. And Carlos could hear both. And he didn't ask her about either. They kept talking. About the bakery. About Mia's piano teacher. About whether Mr. Tran's banh mi was better with the pate or without. And at some point Mara realized they'd been on the phone for almost 2 hours. Carlos, your phone bill. Mara, shut up. They talked for another 40 minutes. And then there was nothing else to say. Thank you. Anytime. Anytime. You call me anytime. You hear me. Yes. And they hung up. She sat at the table for a while. Hollis came back. She put her hand on his back again. And then, and this is the part one want you to remember. She got up. She went to the small desk in the corner of the living room. She took out a piece of writing paper, the cream-colored kind she'd bought once at a stationery store on Hawthorne and had never used. She took out a pen. She sat down. And she wrote. She wrote, "Dear Mrs. Okonkwo." She stopped. She started again. She wrote, "Mrs. Okonkwo, my name is Mara Vance. I was a lance sergeant in the 14th, in your daughter's squad. I was with her on Kepler-186f. I have wanted to write this letter for 3 years, and I have not known how to start it, so I am going to start it badly and finish it anyway, because I have decided that you have waited long enough. Your daughter was my friend. She was funny. She was very funny. She had a thing she did with her eyebrows when somebody said something stupid, where one of them would go up and the other one would stay still, and the whole squad would lose it every time. She was kind. She was kind in the small ways that you only notice afterward, when somebody has stopped being there to do them. She was a good soldier, and she would have been a better veterinarian. She talked about you all the time. She talked about Adiz. She talked about your kitchen. She talked about your jollof. She made the rest of us hungry. I was with her at the end. She was very brave. I want to tell you exactly what she said, because she asked me to, and I have not done it, and I am doing it now. She said, "Tell my mom I wasn't scared." I have been carrying that sentence for 3 years because I was not sure if it was true. I am writing to you tonight because I have decided that it does not matter whether it was true. She wanted you to have it. So I am giving it to you. I am sorry it took me this long. I am sorry I did not write 3 years ago. I am sorry I did not write 2 years ago. I am sorry every year that I did not write. There is no explanation for it that does not sound like an excuse, so I will not offer one. She loved you very much. I knew that because she did not have to say it. You could see it on her, the way you can see weather on a hill. If you ever want to write back, my address is on the envelope. If you do not, I understand that too. I just wanted you to have this. I have been carrying it, and it was not mine to carry. Sincerely, Mara Vance. She put the pen down. She read the letter once. She didn't change anything. She folded it, put it in an envelope, wrote the address from the tablet on the front of the envelope in her careful, upright handwriting, put a stamp on it, set it on the kitchen counter where she'd see it in the morning. She got into bed. The line of light was under the door. Hollis came up and settled into the bend behind her knees. The bakery was quiet downstairs. The street was quiet. Her phone was on the bedside table, face down. The water bottles were in their places. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. And the ceiling was just a ceiling. She breathed in and out. And at some point the breaths got slower. And at some point she stopped tracking the line of light. And for the first time in 3 years, she slept all the way through to morning. And she didn't dream. She woke at 7. It was Thursday. Thursday was banh mi day. She got up and made coffee. And she actually drank it. The whole cup. Standing at the window in her sweatpants and the long thermal she slept in. The alley below was wet and gray and quiet. Hollis sat on the windowsill next to her and watched a crow on a wire across the alley. His tail twitched once, slowly, in the disciplined way of a cat who'd decided not to bother. The letter was on the counter where she'd put it. She picked it up. She put it in her bag. She went downstairs. The bakery had been open since 5. The bell over the door made its small, bright sound when she pushed in. And the smell came up around her, butter and bread and pâté, and that particular Vietnamese coffee Mr. Tran made in a glass pot at the back. Mr. Tran was at the till in his white apron. And there was a customer ahead of her. Now pay attention, because this is the moment. The customer was a young woman. She was 22, maybe 23. Green canvas jacket, dark jeans, boots that had been polished recently. The small giveaway of someone whose hands still remembered how to polish boots. Her hair was very short, the kind of short that grew out from a deployment cut and hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. There was a duffel bag at her feet. The duffel bag had a unit patch on the side, the small dark patch of the 22nd Long-Range Reconnaissance, a unit Mara knew by reputation and had never served with. The 22nd had been deployed to a different action, a smaller and more recent one, a containment thing on a moon of one of the gas giants that Mara couldn't have named without thinking about it. The young woman was buying coffee. Her hands were on the cup. She'd paid already and she was waiting for the change. Her hands were turning the cup. 1 quarter rotation, then another quarter rotation, then another. And her eyes were on the door. Mara watched her from 2 steps back and saw the small steady count of the door glances. 6 seconds. 6 seconds. 6 seconds. Yeah, Mara knew that count. Mr. Tran put the change in the young woman's palm. The young woman said thank you. Her voice was low and even, the voice of someone managing. She turned. She picked up her duffel. She started to leave. The sleeve of her jacket pulled back over her wrist. There was a small dark numeral on the inside of her forearm. It was a 22, and beneath it there were 2 dots. And Mara knew, the way you know, the way it cannot be unknown, what those 2 dots meant. The dots were for the ones who hadn't come back. They weren't allowed on official records. People got them anyway. The young woman saw Mara's tattoo at the same moment Mara saw hers. There was a second where neither of them moved. Then Mara said, quietly, "First month back?" The young woman stopped at the door. Her hand was on the handle. "3rd week," she said. Mara nodded. She didn't move forward. She didn't crowd. She said, "It gets," and then she stopped. Because the sentence she'd been about to say was a lie. And she didn't have a lie in her this morning. She started over. It doesn't get easier. But it gets different. You find things. The young woman's eyes were very bright. She said, "Yeah? Yeah." The young woman didn't move. Mr. Tran was very still behind the counter. The radio in the back was playing the morning news in Vietnamese at low volume. Mara said, "There's a bar on Mississippi Avenue. The Anchor. Wednesdays, about 8. There's a couple of us. You don't have to talk. You can just sit. You can drink soda. Nobody asks anything." The young woman swallowed. "Okay," she said. Mara took the small pad of order slips Mr. Tran kept by the till. She tore off the top one. She wrote, in her careful, upright handwriting, "The Anchor. Mississippi and Skidmore. Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Mara." She held it out. The young woman took it. She looked at it for a moment, like she was reading it. Then she folded it. Once in half, and once more in quarters, and she put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, the way a person puts away something fragile. And she zipped the pocket shut. "Thank you," she said. "Sure." The young woman almost said something else. She didn't. She opened the door. The bell rang. She went out into the gray morning. And through the window Mara watched her stand on the sidewalk for 3 seconds, looking left and then right, the way they all did now. And then she shouldered her duffel and walked. And was gone. Mara turned to the counter. Mr. Tran was looking at her. He didn't say anything. He pulled the day-old banh mi from the bin and put it in a paper bag. And then he pulled a second one, fresh, and put that in the bag too. And he folded the top of the bag down. And he handed it to her. On the house today, he said. Why? Mr. Tran shrugged. He was a small man, perhaps 65. Very dark eyes. A face that had been through more than he had ever told her about. He said, some days, two is better. Mara felt her throat close. She didn't let it. Thank you, Mr. Tran. Sure. Sure. You go now. The light is nice. She paid for her coffee. He took her money. She picked up the bag. She went out. The post office was 4 blocks. She walked it slowly. The light was the kind of gray that had a gold in it somewhere, behind the cloud, and the puddles on the sidewalk caught the sky. She passed the closed bookstore. The laundromat. She crossed at the light. At the corner of Belmont and 28th, there was a man playing a small accordion for change. The song he was playing was something old and slow she didn't know. She put $2 into the open case. He nodded at her without breaking the song. And she walked on. The post office had a blue collection box outside the door. She took the letter out of her bag. She stood in front of the box for a moment. The letter was very light in her hand. She'd been carrying it for 3 years. In a different form. The form of a sentence she hadn't said. Now it was paper. Now it weighed an ounce. Now it had a stamp. She opened the slot. She slid the letter in. She heard it land against the other letters at the bottom.
3 years she carried it. Now it is gone. Sent. Done.
She kept her hand on the metal flap for 2 seconds. Then she let it close. She stood there for another moment. A bus went by. A woman with a stroller went past behind her, talking on her phone in Spanish. A boy on a scooter went by. The accordion at the corner was still going, faint now, the slow song winding through the gray air. She turned. She walked to work. She'd switched a shift with Pri, and she was on the early today, the 7 to 3. She came into the nursery through the side door at 3 minutes to 7. Put her bag in the back room. Put on her apron. Washed her hands at the long stainless sink. The water was very cold, and she let it run on her wrists for a moment. Then she dried her hands. And she went out into the greenhouse. The light was coming through the polycarbonate. It was coming through at a low angle. Gold and green where it passed through the leaves of the tall ficus in the corner. Gold and white where it fell on the long benches of seedlings. Gold and clean on the concrete floor. The night-blooming jasmine had closed for the day, but its smell was still in the warm air. Faint, a memory of itself. The tomato starts she'd watered 4 nights before had pushed 2 more sets of true leaves out and were standing up straight in their flats. Dark green. Serious. The way a tomato plant is serious about being a tomato plant. The basil was in flower at the ends. The marigolds were ready to go out for the wedding on Saturday. Mara picked up the wand. She didn't turn it on yet. She walked the length of the long bench. Slowly. And she looked at each row. And she touched a leaf here and there, lightly, with the back of one finger. The way you might touch the cheek of a sleeping child to make sure of the warmth. Her hands weren't doing anything restless. Her hands were just doing the work. The radio in the corner was on low. The station this early played classical. There was a piano piece coming out of it. Slow. For notes, and then 4 more. The kind of piece that wasn't trying to be anything other than what it was. She turned the water on. She watered the jasmine. She watered the tomatoes. She watered the basil and the lemon balm and the marigolds and the long flat of pansies that had come in on Tuesday. She watered in the slow, even pattern she'd developed for them, with the fine mist for the small ones, and the gentler flow for the older starts. And the water came down on the leaves and ran off and beaded on the concrete and steamed faintly where it hit the warm pipes under the benches. Somewhere outside, on the road, a truck went by with its reverse beeper chirping. She didn't turn her head. She thought, for 1 second, about Devi. She thought about her in the way she hadn't been able to think about her for 3 years. Not the corridor, not the visor, not the last words, but a Tuesday in the mess on the training base at Pendleton, 2 years before the drop, when Devi had been 20 and had stolen a bread roll off Yusuf's tray. And Yusuf had said, in great theatrical betrayal, Akonquo, after everything we have been to each other. And Devi had said, chewing, the price of friendship is bread. And Halloran had said, from the next table, without looking up from his coffee, Akonquo, give the man his bread back. And Devi hadn't given it back. And Yusuf had stolen one off Bex's tray to replace it. And Bex hadn't noticed. And they had all laughed. The whole table had laughed. And the sun had been coming in through the high windows of the mess in long bars. And the coffee in Halloran's cup had been steaming. And that had been a morning. And they had all been alive. Mara stood with the wand in her hand and the water running. And she let the morning be a morning. She let it sit in her. She didn't hold it. She didn't push it away. It came and stayed for a while. And then it went, gently, the way a cat leaves a windowsill. And she came back into the greenhouse. And the light was still coming through the panels. And the plants were still growing. And she was still here. She watered the rest of the row. The line of light was everywhere. It was on the leaves and on the concrete and on the back of her hand and on the rim of the cup of coffee she'd left on the potting bench. It was on the small dark numeral on the inside of her forearm where the sleeve had pulled back. It was in the air. The morning was very quiet. The plants were growing. She watered them.
That one stayed with me. She did not win the fight. She just sent a letter. And sometimes it is the bravest thing a person can do is to warn them. Like and subscribe my channel and I will see you guys in the next one.